What's up guys, welcome back to the channel. So one of my most popular videos of all time on this channel was the top 5 most OP God releases ever video. So naturally, today we're going to count down the top 5 weakest God releases ever. Doubt this one will be as popular since people care way more about OP gods than they do about shit ones, but let's go. Also, sorry about this video being a little late. I kinda lost motivation when getting gameplay for each god for the video, because I had like 10 games straight of just utter shit, so some of this might just be like clash and random gameplay and stuff. It might not be the best, so sorry about that. Also, if there's any outdated or missing information in this video, then I apologise for that. A lot of the information comes from the Smite God History website, link in the description, which is really useful for these types of videos, but it doesn't cover absolutely every change to a god. And looking through like every single set of patch notes is just a pain, so just bear with me, and if there's anything I did miss, then drop it in the comments. But without further ado, let's get into it with number 5. So we're going to kick off the list with a god you probably didn't expect, that being Thor. You've got to be an elite Smite veteran to have been around for release Thor, but I'm sure a few of you watching were, so let everyone know what your experience was with him when he was released, because personally I wasn't around for it. But from some research, I found that he seemed to be incredibly weak at launch. For starters, he just had very weak numbers across the board, with a lot of them receiving buffs shortly after his release. The double tap was still a double tap and obviously hurt pretty hard, but it was noticeably weaker than present day and received a small damage buff. The main part with his hammer on release though was that the ability to teleport to Mjolnir wasn't even a thing. Straight up, he just couldn't teleport to his hammer on his original release. This was only added in later, a few months after, so naturally this severely hampered his mobility options compared to modern day Thor. His wall was probably the weakest part of his kit back then. Instead of stunning like it does now, it only slowed, making it so Thor's only hard CC was on his ultimate. Granted, they added some damage onto the wall a bit later, but on his original release it didn't even do any damage. But the damage was also then removed when they made it a stun instead of a slow. But on his original release, the wall was incredibly weak compared to today. The 3 was also buffed enormously in terms of damage, and the ult stun was bumped up to 1.5 seconds from 1 second on its original release. Plus some smaller minor damage increases and misc changes like reduced post-fire delays and projectile speeds on the hammer and stuff like that. But just look at all these buffs, man. Do let me know if I'm completely wrong on this one, but from my research and looking at all these buffs, it seems he was very weak. But yeah, do let me know for anyone who was around to witness his release if he was actually underpowered or not, but from what I've seen it seems like he was. So taking the number 4 spot is Cabrakan. With a title like Destroyer of Mountains, he sure had an underwhelming release. And unlike Thor, I was actually around for this one, so I do have some personal experience to add in here. I fucking loved playing Cabrakan at launch, because everyone was shitting on him for being like the weakest god release ever at that point, and I was just building Poly and Soul Reaver and playing Joust and Siege because I was a casual boy back then. But boy was he bad. He was like branded as this Guardian who was a hybrid between a defensive Guardian type and an assassin, except instead of excelling in one role, he just sucked at both. He didn't do enough damage to be considered for the aggressive in-your-face support style, and he didn't have enough CC and peel to be considered a traditional support. He had a whole bunch of buffs to his damage and some of his CC numbers, along with a whole lot of fixes and quality of life changes like reduced recovery times and having haste on his 1. Yet when it was first released, he didn't even have haste on his 1, so it was near impossible to chase people down properly with it. Since his stuns were both only 1 second at launch as well, they essentially just self-DR'd each other, and the one you used second was always 6.67 seconds instead of 1. So he barely had any good CC either, so even after a lot of buffs, he was still not really viable. He took even more damage buffs, some cooldown reductions, and allowing his passive to apply to himself that finally made him viable. So where Cabrakan was a Guardian that failed to be an assassin, Adagi was an assassin that also failed to be an assassin. Pro segues as intersect, boys. So Adagi, while not reworked entirely, was changed pretty drastically from her original release. Since everyone complained and basically no one played her, Hi-Rez kinda overbuffed her by a ton to make her insanely broken after a few weeks, and for numerous buffs. On her original release, her 1 didn't slow or have haste, she didn't have knock-up immunity on the 2, the 3 had a weird awkward post-hit delay, along with her awkward as fuck attack chain with a super slow hit at the start, meaning it was really hard to AA cancel effectively on her, where other assassins like Susanoo could easily do it. But worst of all was her ultimate. The chains were so slow. Like, her ultimate now is almost impossible to miss, but on her original release, it was much easier to miss than hit it. She also didn't have the ability to jump early from the powwow, so it essentially gave everyone who she did manage to hit like 25 years to beads, use an ultimate, or simply run out of range, which by the way broke the chains as well, and then they wouldn't even be pulled. But yeah, these are just a few of the buffs she's received shortly after her release to make her viable. While some of these buffs might seem menial, like the haste on the 1, the sheer number of buffs and quality of life changes she's received makes her easily deserving of the number 3 spot in my opinion. Okay, now we're getting into meme status. The Kappa King himself is at the number 2 spot on the list. So it's probably no surprise to anyone that Kuzenbo is on this list. I'm sure a lot of you were expecting him at number 1 considering his complete meme of a release. Kuzenbo's situation was kind of similar to Cabrakan's actually. He was meant to be this aggressive, almost warrior-like guardian that wanted to be in people's faces doing damage and causing chaos. Issue is, his damage was extremely low at release without doing some random meme shit with like Thorns, Nemean and his 2. His CC was also super awkward, like his Kappa didn't slow like it does now. His dash was really hard to control with an enormous turning circle, and his ult mainly knocked enemies away from his team instead of upwards like it does now. This led to most of his CC actually hindering his team, so he was really awful as a support. He did see extremely limited success in solo, but never really got anywhere because his clear was bad and he had no self-sustain, a combination of which makes the god basically unviable in solo. Where guardians like Sobek have self-sustain and decent clear, Kuzenbo just had no place anywhere really. Lacking the CC for support, lacking the bursting gank potential for jungle, and lacking the clear and sustain for solo, he was just kinda left in the dust. Even now after so many buffs over the course of his lifespan, Kuzenbo is just balanced, he's not amazing. He's not making any waves, but he's at least viable as a solo laner now. It took a hell of a lot to get him there though from his original release date, which is why he's at the number 2 spot on this list. So the reason why Kuzenbo is number 2 is because after enough buffs he did become somewhat viable. Raven however required a pretty significant kit rework as simple buffs couldn't make his awkward kit work whatsoever. Raven was yet another really weird release. Similar to Adagi and Kuzenbo, there just seemed to be a bunch of parts of his kit that didn't really make any sense at all. His 2 made him damage immune but not CC immune for some reason. Whether or not this was just to not straight copy Changa's 2 or not, I don't know, but it really just felt weird to try and use it in a way that felt meaningful. His passive was just an extension of his 1 basically, giving it some more damage but nothing else, compared to his current passive which gives him sustain, which is much more applicable than just enhancing his 1. His ult was the weirdest part of his kit though. Most of his other abilities aside from his passive were just enhanced rather than reworked entirely. His ult though was just a complete clusterfuck that was insanely hard to make meaningful use of. It dealt just absolutely puny damage. I mean look at that shit, that's an ultimate. He did less damage than his 2 at his release, which is like, yeah he's a warrior not an assassin, or I guess was a warrior I should say since he's not a warrior anymore. But like come on, Hercule is out here doing 800 base damage alone and you're trying to come in with this? Nah, not looking good for our boy Raven. Yeah, that's not all it did a slight knockback which was really unremarkable, but there was one redeeming quality of this ability. It did give 40% damage reduction from all sources except the player he ulted to. Really useful in teamfights, but literally 100% useless in a 1v1 situation. Like think about a solo lane matchup against Bellona, these 2 gods were released at similar times. Bellona ult stuns you, does almost 3 times the amount of damage, and gives her extra stats while she's fighting around the flag. While Raven's is literally just a leap and like 50 damage. Can't even be used for an escape either since it required a target back then unlike it does now. Don't get me wrong, when they reworked Raven's ult it was really fucking broken and more than compensated for its release, but the release version of his ult was just a complete shit show. I still played the shit out of him because there was a lot of lulls to be had by beating people with the worst god in the game at that point, but yeah, this god release was just awful. But anyway, that's about it for the list guys. Let me know your thoughts on it, whether you agree or disagree, and also any of the little tidbits about these god releases in the comments that I might have missed. But if you did enjoy the video, then be sure to drop a like for 10,000 free V-Bucks, and subscribe for more lists, rants, guides, and everything Smite on the channel in the future, and I'll catch you guys later. Peace out, you nerds.